Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast. I have one of my favorite guests that I like to have come back periodically because he's a continuous source of wisdom. His name is Bob Walters. He puts out a weekly column called Common Christianity. Looks like we're up to issue 924, so I don't know how many years that is offhand, but he'll let us know. But each column comes out, each week, and it talks about different issues, not only in Christian faith, but just in the world. So a recent one talks about Richard Dawkins, who's a famous atheist skeptic. He talked about being a cultural Christian, enjoying some of the results of Christianity in society, but not believing in it at the same time. And also what came to me and what he wrote about is that people nowadays, and I'm not saying people are bad, I'm one of them, want to enjoy the fruits of whatever it is. They want to get the DoorDash without having to go to the restaurant and do anything. They just want to get the result without having to put in the work. And I think it's tremendously affected and shaped society. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome back, Bob.
Thank you. We're the microwave society. Let's do it fast and Rich, we talk about how it's so, hey, we do things so fast we don't stop and smell the roses. And while smelling the roses, I think is a perfectly fine thing. I appreciate the fact that we can do so much more in our lives because of technologies and DoorDash and things like that. But we look for the good. We look for righteousness is a word that the general population doesn't like because they think it sounds self-serving. But in a Christian context, a religious context, that's what you rely on. There does exist that. And sometimes taking the time to uncover that and contemplate it can be very rewarding, and we don't have to spend all of our lives. We were talking briefly about, going on trips and vacations and so forth. And I really like having a car or being able to get on a plane and doing things somewhat faster. But, we can become so involved in our own lives and our own travels. And, do we have more time to think and to pursue God, but, what are we really using it for? And your point about the Dawkins piece that I did a couple of weeks ago was that he's an atheist. He doesn't want to be. God doesn't make sense to him, but he looks around his life. He's British. He's a British bioscientist, and he looks around and he says, I really like what the Christian society does for us. There are things that that until Jesus, and people say, well, the church is very misogynistic, but it was when you look at what Jesus did. Female equality, that's a function of Christianity. That's something that didn't really exist until Jesus, made women part of his ministry. And people, well, I can't. It's like, well, read the Bible. It's in there.
Yeah, just one more thing before you talk more about Richard Dawkins. In general, I've heard a lot of people say X, Y, Z about the Bible, whatever it is. And a lot of the responses are, well, you haven't looked. Take a look and then reassess and say what's actually there. But if you haven't looked, how could you say, oh, it says this and that, it tells you to do this and that when you don't really know? I just think it's a common mistake.
It is. Don't we do that in so many things? I mean, look at, political events of the day. Who said what about whom? And, we had the unfortunate assassination attempt a couple of weeks ago, and not as a political thing, but you look at the left is all lined up saying it was a conspiracy by the Donald Trump people. And then the right's all saying, well, no, that's a conspiracy by this deep state government or whatever. And we tend not to look for middle ground, which, somewhere in there is truth, but we tend to think that it's either my truth or your truth, and that the one operative major truth doesn't exist. And that's kind of where atheists are. They want truth to be what their bidding is. And if you can get rid of God, then you don't have to worry about there being an objective truth.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When you first saw the video of Dawkins, how did it strike you? I was like, what the? I just thought it was funny and weird. It really surprised me. What did you think?
I had only heard him really on the opposite side of things. And I never read his book. I read plenty of journals and things, so I kind of knew about it, but didn't have an interest in really delving into it. I did find it fascinating that he came back around, that after writing so much against God.
The God Delusion, but a bunch of other books, yeah.
Yep, the God Delusion. And the critique of that was that it wasn't so much, here's a rational case for why there can't be a God, but it was more kind of a screed against, against Christianity. I don't like you because you're Christian. You think you're better than everybody else. And, we get that all the time, which is kind of funny because the leading hallmark of Christianity should be your humility and understanding your fallenness and understanding your sin, but still having the hope and the love and the truth that there's really a purpose for it all. And even if you don't understand it, that doesn't mean that there is no proof. It means that you need to spend some more time thinking about it. And reading the Bible isn't something you can do quick, and you're not going to get it all the first time through. And I look around in my life at people who I know and who I love that don't know the Bible, don't know Christ. They have, and this was something where I think where Dawkins is that even though they don't like the whole Christian thing and they don't maybe think there's a God, that still at some level they do believe there's this transcendent bigger thing, that there may in fact be a reason for us to be here. And, I would call that reason and that purpose, I would call that God. And I look around and I don't really have to prove it. I see a grown tree or grown people or things regenerating, and it's like, well, there has to be a reason for it to be here. Where if you can say, well, there's no reason for that to be here, it's a real short putt to say, there's no reason for me to be here. And joy seems to go out of life pretty quick when you're only pursuing, your appetites and not really pursuing what's, why am I here? And is there a good to be pursued? And that's Dawkins said. It's like, oh, I like this. My life is better because of Christianity, but I just don't want to be one.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird to say that. Like in my own life, I've thought, what's next? Oh, another movie comes out. Ooh, or I eat another meal, or, I have children, that's one of the most fantastic things I've ever experienced in my life is my children. They're awesome.
Yeah.
But the rest of life, I guess the everyday plain parts of life, if there's no meaning to them, what happens to you? You can only go on for so long without meaning. And then where are you, as you get older in your life? Like what? I get a sense of, I'm not all the way there yet. I'm approaching 50, but still have some years, hopefully. But, I've always had the sense of, well, what's going to happen when you get to 70, 80, if you're lucky enough to make it? What would you think when you're near the end if you don't believe in anything? If life is just this random thing and there's no purpose, I would think it would tend to get very scary.
Yeah. And I hit 70 this year. I did it. In May, I passed birthday number 70, and
happy birthday.
Thank you. They talk about how you're still how different am I? We, saw all my high school friends at a 50th reunion a couple of years ago, and some people have aged well, some people haven't. But it is funny how your life may have changed, but, are you still the same person? And if you're approaching 50, that was the age I was when I came to Christ. Sitting in church, it's a story I've told often, but I was sitting in church because my kid wanted to go, and I'm sitting there and the tears are running down my face because all of a sudden I got it. I didn't understand the Bible. I knew about the Bible. I knew about the church. I knew about Father, Son, Holy Spirit from growing up in a church, but I wasn't really a person of faith until I was 47. And since then, I've been growing in that. I found it the most fascinating thing. Along with you, the kids are, in a general prayer, the first thing that I say, Father God, thank you for the love of my children. It's such a wonderful thing that's been a part of this life. And I will tell you, I don't particularly want to have any more children. That being able to raise them, and now they've got kids of their own, and I enjoy seeing that. But, when you get back to what Dawkins was saying, just to pull that back in, that because of Jesus, we have human rights. That's, until Jesus came along, the inviolability of the human person nobody really thought that. Jesus was the first one who said, I came for all mankind. Now, is everybody going to believe in him? No. Is there universal salvation? Will everybody be saved? It's a big discussion point now in academia, but I read the Bible and I don't see everybody being saved. But at the same time, there's nobody that I've had some rough patches with different people in my life, but I can't think of a single person that I would say, please God, don't save them. Because what you want to have that, you would want everybody to enjoy the truth and the peace of knowing their creator. And if you know that you have a creator, well, then it's a great jump in life. And as we look at, at the beyond, probably the biggest mystery that any of us encounters is understanding that eternity is not a part of time. We think of eternity as, okay, well, that's a long time. We're going to be floating around. And I don't think we're floating. I think the way the Bible talks about the new heaven and the new earth, I think we're going to be very surprised of what that environment's like. We're going to be surprised who's there. We're going to be surprised who's not there. But it's a larger world. But what Jesus did, and something is why he's the most important person in history, is that, take the narrative. God created everything and everybody. And then you've got, and he chose the Jews. There were people prior to the Jews. Abraham technically wasn't a Jew. He believed in God before the Jews. Job wasn't technically a Jew. You don't have to say technically, but these are all people who believed in a one God, before Judaism happened, and then Israel becomes God's chosen people. But all through those thousands of years, it wasn't until Jesus where mankind's link directly with God was something that became a reality. And that's the, is there a better definition of truth than something that's real all the time? And we deal with an awful lot of things in society that, my truth, your truth, and it's all just our opinions. It doesn't reflect the reality of what God has made. And sadly, it comes down to so often sexuality, the CRT thing. Have you noticed that you don't hear so much about critical race theory, that wokeness, which started as really more as a racial component? Today, and we're talking, in the last, 10 years or whatever it was, 5 years ago, that even wokeness was more of things of a racial nature. Today, when you say wokeness, it seems to me anyway, to have a lot more to do with the, sexual stuff, gender.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and we haven't, so we've kind of done that to ourselves. And, the thing that happened, started the Olympics the other day, with that's the Feast of Dionysus or whoever it was. And I'm like, well, it's mocking something, but, Christians should never be surprised when we get mocked. I mean, that's sort of that Jesus was mocked, and, so the mocking is disrespectful and everything, but it makes me sadder to see. And again, I'm not big into the Olympics. I was a sports writer for a long time, and sports has kind of been something that as I've gotten older, I'm not as interested in as I was. I've got other appetites and so forth. So I wasn't watching the Olympics. I haven't paid a lot of attention to that, but I know that people say, well, that's just an abomination. It's like, well, yeah, a whole lot of life is abomination. Why should that be any difference? And one of the funny thing is that France technically is still a Catholic country. It's a Roman Catholic country. It has been for, since, it came through the Reformation 500 years ago and remained a Catholic country, where Germany kind of went, a lot of it went more toward Protestant, but Spain and France were two places that stayed as specifically Catholic countries. And yet the French are kind of renowned for free living and freedom and oddball stuff. So I looked at all that.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
What's weird is, if Christianity is not true, it's no big deal. Why get so upset about it? Not believers, but non-believers, atheists. Why rail against it? Why make fun of it? Why acknowledge it? Why spend any time talking about it? It makes no sense.
Yeah, and why are you offended if I say something about, well, you won't be in heaven? Well, yes, I will. What makes you so special? It's like, well, and it's not just about reading the Bible, although that helps, but Bible, heaven is where God lives. Heaven is where Jesus lives. Heaven is, that invitation that we have through Christ to be there is is conditional only on our faith in Jesus and understanding his purpose. Remember, Satan knows everything more about Jesus in heaven than any human being does. Yes, I believe Satan is a real thing, character, spirit, whatever he is. But I also look at people that if you're going to be offended that, heaven is something for Christians, it's like, well, yeah. I mean, Islam has a paradise that is a different deal, but a Muslim reveres Jesus as a perfect human being and a great prophet, and has several, but a Muslim wants no relationship with Allah. Allah is always transcendent. Where with a Christian, God is, we become in relationship, direct relationship, loving relationship, eternal relationship with God through faith in Jesus Christ. So, and it sounds a little rough to say it, but it's like, if you don't want God in this life, if you don't want Jesus in this life, if you don't want anything to do with the Bible in this life, then why would you be offended, by saying, well, heaven is a Christian deal, if you will. So if you don't want Christianity, why? It's a nonsensical argument to say, well, I'm going to heaven, but I don't know how you're going to get there because it doesn't sound like something that you even want.
Yeah, or just say, all Christians are crazy and just go about your business. Why get upset about it? But they do. It's very odd. Like Dawkins will say, or has said, that he enjoys, churches, and he enjoyed, the lifestyle and a lot of the things that Christianity brought. He says, I don't believe a word of it, of course. But, I like this, that, and the other. So I thought that was just a strange cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
It unshackles him from the responsibility of a moral response. He doesn't, it's not like he has to say, okay, well, if I like Christianity, then suddenly I have to behave. And I know in our conversation I've mentioned this before, but when you look at the last things that Jesus says to his disciples, which famously and most drawn out are in the Gospel of John in chapters 13, 14 of the Last Supper. 15 and 16 are the walk from the Last Supper to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's arrested. And it only appears in John, but pretty much that whole time, during the foot washing and the Last Supper and the First Communion and all those kinds of things that happen at the Last Supper, salvation's mentioned. There's a little bit about behavior is mentioned, but his last words for 2 full chapters, 15 and 16, which is the vine, and where he says more about how the Holy Spirit, but what Jesus is saying is, he isn't telling his disciples to behave. He's not telling them to obey this or obey that, or anything. He's thoroughly immersed in telling them who he is, that they are going to be they're his friends, they're going to be part of his life. And so much of modern Christianity and what other people think of it is, well, it's all about obedience. Yeah, obedience is important, but that obedience comes from your love. If you love Jesus, then that will show in the fruit of your works. But when people start thinking about, well, I got to think about my sin, I got to think about my obedience, who are you thinking about? You're thinking about yourself. Where, what Jesus, the 2 commands of Jesus are to love God and love others. And in, on these depend all the laws and the prophets is the way I read in the Bible. I'm very kind of passionate to a fault that when I hear people say, well, the trick to Christianity is obedience, it's like, no, it's not. The trick is love and identifying who Jesus is.
Well, I would think people too, this is a different topic, but when people consider faith or come to faith, how could you love someone, meaning God, that you don't know, you haven't really experienced, or maybe you have to think about it and say, this thing that happened to me, maybe that was God, or, but I would think a lot of people, maybe they feel like they haven't experienced them at all. So how do you love someone again that you don't really know yet?
Or you're having a terrible life. I mean, that's
too. Yeah.
Why do bad things happen? And if God's so good, why do bad things happen to good people and so forth? And yet humanity has really done that to ourselves. You can go back and forth on, how God tests you. He will test you beyond what you can stand, but I think, maybe he will, because you yourself don't know what you might be able to do. But when we look at what we might consider the good, you've had bad things happen to you in your life, I'm sure. I've had in my life that were either uncomfortable, bad. I did, things, I can't believe I did that. And yet I don't give up on, I can usually see this bad thing happened, but it came back around and made sense that, okay, I keep marching toward Christ, and life isn't always a bowl of cherries, but at the same time, I know the benefit is that I know that the truth exists. I know that God is righteous. Things are, whatever the good is whatever God says they are. So when there's no shortage of people that, I see it online, I see it on Facebook all the time. I say, well, this is why there can't be a God, because this bad thing happened. Look what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now. That's, that's terrible. But is that God doing that? Is that Satan doing that? Or is that mankind doing that to mankind? We should never, just, take our own responsibility out of it and say, well, a good God wouldn't do this. People can be pretty lousy. And I think we have a chance at being better by understanding the righteousness of God and the truth of Jesus.
This all, it's funny, this all comes back to the same theme. Dawkins wants the trappings of Christianity without the faith part. Like you just said, people want the world to be fantastic without taking any responsibility for what people do to each other. Again, they get the fruits without the work, the result without the work.
Yeah.
It's universal.
Yeah, and it's important to know where Dawkins is that, in England, they've become, I think right now the Prime Minister is Muslim. The Mayor of London, I think, is Muslim.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still, but yeah.
I'm not sure. And it's important because I've met Muslims in the Middle East, and I've met them here, and most of them are just folks. They're not all the radical Muslims. Not all Christians are the Westboro Baptist Church type variety that are in your face and insulting things and hating America and whatever it may be. But one of the things that Dawkins makes a point that he put it down to Africa. He said, well, I know there's Christian missionaries down there. I know there are Islamic missionaries down there, and they're both looking for the allegiance of the people. And Dawkins, who has seen radical Islam up close, and he has seen a beneficial Christianity up close, he'd much rather have the Christian model of love and service and sacrifice, where you sacrifice yourself for others, versus the Islamic model of more at the point of the sword kind of a thing, where most of what Muhammad did was he went around and say, hey, please follow me. He said, follow me, or I'm going to cut your throat. And that was the 7th century, when Islam took over most of northern Africa and started to take over a chunk of Europe. So he looks at the different religions and says, well, I'd much rather I like the Christian model, because if it's done right, it should be peaceful. They say, well, yeah, Germany was they were a Christian country. Well, they were, and then you had Hitler along there, who's like, he's not a Christian. He talks about it, but he's not a Christian. And what he really wants people to to admire to worship is his Reich and the racial nature of the Aryans. And so there you have, again, people doing horrible things to people. So Christians get it wrong too, I guess is my point. In fact, he redid the German church. He called it the Reichskirche, which is the state's church. And you could believe anything you want as long as you put Hitler first.
Well, I've been seeing articles recently that the CCP in China is rewriting the Bible and handing it out to people because there's a huge underground movement of Christianity that's surging. They took the parable of the harlot that was to be stoned, but in their version, Jesus actually stones her himself. Yeah. It's crazy. I've heard the WEF, Klaus Schwab, talk about using AI to rewrite the Bible. Again, why do they care? If it's no big deal, it just makes no sense.
I've got a dear friend from here. I'm in Indianapolis. I used to be a journalist for the Indianapolis Star, wrote sports, and the guy who was a business editor, buddy of mine, Mo Wildy, he's left journalism, and he does a ton of service work. Good Christian guy, and he's worked with helping addicts, and he's working right now on starting a school. And he was told by state of Indiana, if somebody outside of America happens to hear this, Indianapolis is in the state of Indiana within the United States. But he was a state government official of something. I mean, he had his hand on a lot of money that he could give grants and so forth. And to hear Mo tell it, the guy said, well, we can get you $1 million for this school startup you want to do. And Mo says, well, it's going to be a Christian school. I said, nope, can't do that. You can get state money, but not if you're going to talk about Jesus. So when you look at Dawkins, who kind of sees a definite cultural benefit to having a Christian narrative, a Christian morality, if you can go that far, the love God, love others, help others, serve others. Those are all things that should make it better for all of us. We have, those are things that could make it better for all of us, but for somehow we've managed to shoot ourselves in the foot. Specific, some people will go back 250 years to the foundings. Some people just go to the 1960s when we took the Bible, prayer, and God out of school all in the same 3 or 4 year period. And then we wonder why by, the 1970s, suddenly we had, pretty much abortion on demand, and we had a lot of, unwed mothers, we had homes without fathers and so forth. And you wonder how much of this public thing of getting rid of Jesus and prayer, how can we possibly be surprised that, some of the Christian culture has kind of ossified, or that's probably the wrong word, but that it's sort of, it's gone away, is because we're not, those things are no longer being taught and aren't really part of the dominant state narrative like they were for, most of our history.
Well, I think, people have to be taught values from somewhere. So if faith is not teaching values, then what is? Common culture, movies we see, what happened at the Olympics, things like that. That's what's doing the teaching. That's what I'm hearing and seeing everywhere. That, depravity literally is being taught. Yeah. That's what I see in movies and just all over the place. So
it's an education.
But yeah, someone's got to teach us. People need to be taught something, so they're being taught something. There's no vacuum there.
Yeah, but they're being taught that they're being taught you do you, and that you and your opinion are the highest moral value, and that would scare the heck out of me if I thought that what my that my opinion had to stand for the highest moral value or the highest human aspiring or whatever that I could do, because I can't think as creatively and as highly as as God has as God can. And if there's no God and all the creativity is up to me, then I'd say we're all in trouble.
So what is that? So what are some examples? Keeping with the theme, wanting the result without the work. What are some stories you've seen in your personal life, or just that you've seen where you saw that someone got a result without the work, and it actually brought them to ruin? This is the whole paradox of the thing, it seems like.
And I laugh because I wrote a column about this a few years ago. And when in your intro, I started writing that column weekly in November of 2006. So there's been 924 weeks, except for one calendar mistake that the newspaper helped me make. But I've written one every week, so so it's been 17 years.
Wow.
One of them, when I was a kid, we had this. My dad was a classical music buff, and we had this story record. It was an LP. It was called Sparky's Magic Piano, and it was about Sparky's Magic. You're asking me for a real life example, and as soon as we get off, I'll think of one. One thing that I wrote about was Sparky's Magic Piano, and it was a story about a little boy that wanted to become a great concert pianist. So Satan makes a deal with him, and the boy becomes a great concert pianist. So everybody's amazed at his talent, and then at the end of the story, he's on stage, Carnegie Hall, wherever it might be, and he's like the most celebrated pianist of his time, and the devil says time's up, and then he's entirely humiliated because now suddenly he can't blink away any better than any other 8-year-old might be able to blink away. So there's a moral there to the story that if you don't actually put in the time, there's no easy way to do it. I always, when I was a kid, it was the Beatles era. Well, I wanted to be a drummer. And I just said, why can't somebody just make me a good drummer? In times of my life, say, well, I wish I could play golf. I wish I could play the guitar. Or I wish I could do this. Or I wish I had money or whatever. And Ayn Rand, famous atheist, wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. And she was a very bitter woman. She'd come out of Russia and she'd lost her husband. And she was just kind of renowned as being a very sourpuss kind of a person. Some great points, though, philosophically about our own responsibilities. And one of the things that she said, she can't, and this could go specifically to, I wish I were rich. Please let me win the lottery or have some relative I don't know that has $1 bazillion and suddenly make me rich. And she makes the point that none of us can be greater than that which we earn. Meaning that if you understand money and you get a lot of money and you know how to use it and it's something that you've built up yourself and you've worked and put in the time for, then you will be able to manage and do more. In the Bible, it talks about if you're given a little, if you can manage a little, then God will give you more, so you can manage a lot. But, we know, I mean, I've definitely seen people where, and even in our country now, if somebody says, here, Rich, I'm going to give you $5,000, what are you going to do with it? And you'd probably say, well, I've got this investment, or I could put it over here, or there's something you'd do, but you'd probably try to figure a way to make that money return itself to you. You'd try to not spend it and put it somewhere where it will have some sort of a lasting benefit. My friend Mo, who I mentioned, who's trying to start this school in a lower income part of town, those kids, you give them $5,000, they'd spend it as fast as they can. Why? Because they don't have hope that things will be better tomorrow. They don't have faith that they'll be better tomorrow. And so often we think faith as being, okay, well, I believe in this. Okay, faith should be a reality of life. I don't believe that I'm married to my wife, Pam. I am married to my wife, Pam, and she's married to me, and we have a marriage, and that's how we live. And our faith should never be that external thing that, well, I believe the Bible, I believe that thing. That when it's truly faith, it's a way that we live.
Well, I mean, someone that doesn't have that faith that you have, how do they develop it? I know it's another, road to go down, but it also seems like, well, if I'm here and I'm running around doing my thing, how do I get this thing called faith? How do I develop it? That's, again, it's a whole other separate issue.
Yeah, well, it kind of is, and it's not something that I'm trying to think how I got mine and people in church. Okay, I mean, and if it sounds like a dodge, I apologize. But where our faith comes from is the first thing people say: well, study the Word, work on a relationship with Jesus, pray, ask for wisdom, ask for faith, ask for the wisdom, do things that as you maybe do, go above and beyond for other people so that you develop your love, show your love. And then two things are going to happen. Either your love's going to grow, or you're going to get shut down because your advances, and I don't mean loving like go for a girl or go for a boy or go for anything, but just here, I want to love my community some way. I want to, help out in a soup kitchen or do those kinds of things. And if you've got a good experience, then, your faith will grow. But I think everybody, that's in the Christian faith knows that the correct answer is that the Holy Spirit brings that to you. Jesus is always looking for you, and if you're looking for him back, and if your heart says, I want this to grow, then let it grow. And there will be times where you'll say, well, maybe this isn't true. Well, having the discipline to say, look, this is who I'm going to love. I'm going to resolve to that. I will love Jesus. I will read the Bible. I will be part of a church fellowship. And then, Rich, it's either going to grow or it's not. Jesus came for the whole world, but the whole world isn't going to go back to him. And you've undoubtedly heard of Calvinism versus a thing called Arminianism, which is Calvin was the theologian that kind of helped Luther with the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. And Luther was more the rebel, and Calvin was was more the theologian. But this is where the Bible talks a lot about the elect. So are you part of the elect, or am I part of the elect? And it's like, well, golly, I don't know. People say, are you saved? I said, well, yeah, I think so. I look at the Bible, believe it, and life, I know who Jesus is, which puts me even with Satan, because Satan knows who Jesus is. I look at, trying to lead a life that enhances the light of Christ to those around me. I do it imperfectly, but so I think I'm trying to do good. So yeah, I probably am, so yeah, I'm going to say I'm saved because I trust Jesus. But do I love Jesus regardless? And when that becomes better, when it doesn't become a part of what do I get for doing this, and it becomes part of who you are. The Bible talks about the elect, meaning that you're either in it or you're not. If you're an Arminianist, Justin Arminius was also a European who was actually taught at the same school in northern France or Belgium where Calvin was. And Arminius said, no, you've got free will. I mean, you hear that all the time. Well, I've got a free will, so I can decide who I love. When people say, well, I can't help that I love this person, or I can't help this, or I can't help that. And where Calvin looked at the Bible and where it said, the elect are this, these are the elect. And Calvin would say, well, either you're part of the elect or you're not. So if you are the elect, whether you have faith or don't have faith, you're going whether you like it or not. And even if you do love the Lord, if you're not part of the elect, you're not going. which doesn't make any sense. Where Justin Arminius was the guy who said, no, if you're, your free will, you have some control over what you love. Who will be saved? Well, that's up to God, and they sort you out how, however that happens. But I know that in this life, I'm far. I don't think about rewards. I don't think about, but we're a marketing society.
You didn't sign up for Christianity to get 1% back on all purchases.
No, or an interest-free for a year or anything.
Yeah.
But we're a commercial, commerce-based culture. You quid pro quo. If you get something, you have to pay for it. The Bible doesn't talk much about paying for your, and this drives people nuts, but we always talk about Jesus paid the price. Okay, well, who did he pay it to? And when you look at prices that are paid in the Bible, and I've had people point this out to me and say, well, yeah, but they talk all the time about, this paying a price, and it's a metaphor that people understand, because you think that if I'm going to get something, Jesus says it's a gift, but I still think I have to pay for it, or that he had to pay for it. And I always go, okay, well, who did he pay? Because if Jesus is God, which I believe he is, then God wouldn't pay God himself. But so what should we call it if it's not payment? Well, you can call it love, because love is this huge mystery that it's okay if you don't understand every part of it. That's what a mystery is. You may notice something and it may be real, but I don't understand all parts of it. So it's a mystery, but I don't need to define things in terms of, okay, if I do this, I'm a good Christian, then I will get this reward. And I've got a book on my shelf here called The Believer's Payday. That is a whole book about how if you do this, you'll get this, and that, that if you want to have a good time in heaven or get the biggest mansion or however it is, that that's all based on your good works in this life. And I think that's a lot of malarkey. I'm much more, I don't think in terms of reward or deficits. Like if I put in this much time at the church, do I expect some kind of specific return? It's like, no, you do that because that's my heaven in this life, being able to serve and knowing that truth exists. And I'm good with that. So looking at rewards, you're back to looking at yourself and what do I get? And I think that's not faith. That's merchandising.
Yeah, that makes sense. But why do you think that, it's like an impossible question, but why do you think there's this paradox? It takes a lot of work to enjoy the results of something. Why can't things come easy? What would be wrong if that's how the world worked?
You wouldn't appreciate it. You have aspirations, and let's see, the one thing in my life that I really, really worked at and got pretty good at it at one time was playing tennis. I played in college and was a teaching pro for a while. I was never a professional tennis player, but I had a ton of fun with it. But I look back and I think of all the growth that I had with that was just that was a lot of fun. And when I look at raising my children, I've got two sons, and they're both doing well. They're married. They've got jobs. They've got college degrees. They've got professions. No tattoos. Sorry, but. And I'm like, okay, they're doing pretty well, and I love every, I love that they've been able to do that, but I don't, and it took a long time, but at the same time, I can't identify what exactly I did other than I loved them, and whatever that looked like on any given day, this is where they are. But yeah, that it's in our nature, it's in our human nature that we want to discover and find things, and that. When we just, it's like, you get the $1 million from wherever source, you're not going to appreciate it and nurture it as you would if it's something that you had really worked for. And that's in the commercial static world out here, worldliness. And I'm glad you asked that, but I don't feel that way about my faith in Christ. I'm glad to be where I am. I'm glad I've had 20 some years of studying and reading, and I've, been interested, and it's been just the walk, the journey has been a great part of life. And as I'm on the journey, I think, well, there will be a reward, fine, and whatever day. Okay, you're coming up on 50, and here I'm at 70, and I'm probably closer to the going to that great reward, whatever it is, time wise. But I don't sit back and say, well, I'm just really pleased about this, because maybe it's because you want to appreciate the past, but based on what you've done, it's filled up your life with a purpose, and now you're going forward. And when you can look ahead, that's a really good thing. I know people that are my age, are retired, and whether they're looking forward towards something is, they might not be, and it's a pretty big hole in their life. The guy that he's a pastor. He's got that baptized me 20 years ago. Dave Faust put out a book, Not Too Old, and Dave and I are the same age. He just turned 70, and he talks about growing old as a Christian. And there's some of the normal stuff in it about, being smart with your money and make sure you see the doctor and things like that. But there are a lot of, spiritual components in that the one place where we can always grow is in our relationship with Christ. And this is one of my greatest fears, is that right now I've got my faculties. I know people. I've got a dear friend from high school that has pretty severe dementia. It's a woman that I was, we were very close friends throughout high school and college and stayed that way. And she had her life and I had mine, but she's, dealing today with dementia and so there's one of my questions is, where does that faith go? Where is your life's spark when you can no longer, with dementia or Alzheimer's, whatever it might be, when you don't have, when you may not be cognitively able to discern your own life. Or maybe what's worse is that you have all your faculties and you don't have a purpose. That might be just as bad.
Yeah. But I guess it's safe to say that, that's why I wanted to talk to you about this theme, that true happiness requires work, at least in the secular sense. And there's this like unavoidable trade-off or a paradox or whatever you want to call it between, wanting a good result and being willing to put in the work for it. And
and knowing the truth is such a big thing. And one of the things we do in our society is that when you're going back through the Enlightenment and the philosophers of the last 200 or 300 years, that what we've arrived at is that philosophers, we want to find truth. We're going to define truth, but we don't want to use God to do it. So when you look at it, the word metaphysical tends to scare people, but the metaphysical is only those things in your life that you can't really measure. I mean, how do you measure love? How would you measure truth or faith or morality or your aspirations, your accomplishments, what's fair and what's not fair? Those are all things that, the metaphysics of those are that I can't really measure those. I know they're real and I know they exist. And when in a life in Christ and a life in God, you know that all those things are embodied, that in an overall purpose, that you can kind of lump them all together as love. You can lump them all together as purpose. And what we have in modern philosophy is, we want to find truth, but we don't want to find God. So we're going to take out the one thing that would provide us with a cosmic anchor, if you will, that here's the creator of all things. So let's take that anchor out of it, cut the boat adrift, and then try to find, and then we start wondering why we drift the way we drift when we've cut loose the anchor that God provides, and all these things that we don't even, you can't see the anchor on the floor of the ocean. You just know that it's there and it's holding you. So we deny the existence of truth and then wonder why bad things happen. And where we fill that in is that we create our own truths, and these are our own moralities. And that's what you see in that's Marxist. That's if you really study Karl Marx and what the communist stuff or fascism or whatever you want to call it, that's where that comes from. When people say that, no, we're going to have this, our knowledge of what we have come up with is better than any truth we can find in Christ or in the Bible. And then, you get Satan's cut loose to cause the trouble he can.
I just find it weird that you can look at faith and see all the good things that it has to offer and then say, nah, I'm good. Or, Richard Dawkins. I mean, he could say, wow, for some odd reason, Christianity has done all these things that I'm talking about that I enjoy, culturally, but I don't believe any of it. Yeah. Like how in your mind or someone's mind could they have that cognitive dissonance and be like, doesn't make sense, but whatever.
Loss of control. What do you think about that? That if I want to control it, and when you have faith, it means that you've given control to something else. And I'm really happy giving control to my Creator and to a Savior and to a Lord that I know has my eternal best interests at hand. And I'm not comfortable giving control to most of humanity that doesn't, that has their best interests in, as their first priority. So maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good argument. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, very good food for thought. I don't want to hold you too long, Bob. So,
No.
For people listening that want to subscribe to your column, how can they do that?
I am. It's entirely cost free. It's at Common Christianity. Normal spelling is one word. commonchristianity.blogspot.com. My email, rlwcom@aol.com. It looks like rlwcom@aol.com. Shoot me there. I'm happy to put anybody on the weekly email list. You can look it up online. I people say, well, you ought to copyright that. I say, I haven't really copy. And if somebody wants to share it, if I spark somebody's idea and they want to use it, I'm all for that. One of the first prayers I learned was the prayer of Jabez, where it talks about increase my territory, and people think about, well, make me richer. But I look at that in terms of, let the Lord's hand be with me and let these efforts go out and, further the casting of the truth. And that's all I want out of it. But I'm thrilled anytime that anybody that wants to, hop onto the list and communicate or criticize. Some of my best, my best days with the column have been when somebody's, criticized something I've said, and then it makes me think about it, and then I can either defend it or I can't. But either way, I've learned something, and that's, the reason I do it is to, hopefully I make other people think, because I sure do make myself think.
No, I've read it many times. I encourage listeners to subscribe because it's very thoughtful and very thought-provoking. And once a week, it's not too much. And I appreciate what you do, Bob. It's been great. And thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Always a pleasure, Rich. Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.